You're locked in a stone cell beneath the greatest arena ever built. Above you, 50,000 Romans just watched your husband die fighting a lion. The crowd is leaving. The torches are dimming. Then you hear footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming closer. A shadow fills your doorway. It's the gladiator who survived today's massacre. He's covered in blood that isn't his own. A guard unlocks your cell. The gladiator points at you. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This was Tuesday in the Roman Empire. What I'm about to show you is the part of Roman history they don't teach in schools. The systematic, state-sponsored nightmare that happened after the crowds went home. This isn't speculation. It's documented by Roman writers themselves. The evidence is literally carved into the walls beneath the Colosseum. Hollywood has been lying to you about gladiators for decades. Films show you the blood and combat, the honor and rebellion. What they don't show you is what happened in the hours after the games ended, when the public spectacle transformed into something far darker. I'm talking about a system so disturbing that modern historians created a new Latin term to describe it. Victoria carnales, the carnal victory. The Romans themselves never called it that because to them, it wasn't even remarkable enough to need a special name. It was just normal. Before we go deeper, I need you to do something. Look at the like button right now. If you believe hidden history deserves to be exposed, even when it's uncomfortable, hit that button and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. Because this story isn't just about Rome. It's about what empires do when no one's looking. Now, let's descend into the hypogeum. To understand what happened in those underground chambers, you first have to understand how Rome turned human beings into inventory. This wasn't random cruelty. This was systematic dehumanization on an industrial scale. When Rome crushed a rebellion in Gaul or annihilated a city in Judea, they didn't just win a battle. They processed an entire population like a factory assembly line. Men of military age were sent to die in mines or arenas. Children were sold to slave markets across the empire. Women were designated as captiva, war prizes belonging to the state. Here's where it gets truly chilling. Under Roman law, these people weren't legally human anymore. They were classified as res things, property, the same legal category as furniture or livestock. A conquered woman had no more rights than a chair. You could do anything to her, and it wasn't even technically a crime because you can't commit a crime against an object. But Rome didn't just dehumanize people through law, they dehumanized them through spectacle. The games weren't just entertainment. They were political theater designed to psychologically dominate both the conquered and Rome's own citizens. The poet Martial, writing in the 1st century AD, describes these scenes with disturbing casualness. He writes about prisoners forced to reenact famous myths, except the deaths were real. He's not documenting atrocities, he's praising the efficiency of the system. If this is making you uncomfortable, good. That means you're paying attention. Share this video if you think people need to know what empire actually costs. Now let's talk about the men who received these rewards. Gladiators existed in a bizarre contradiction that Rome never fully resolved. They were simultaneously the lowest and highest members of society, slaves with less legal status than a dog, but celebrities whose faces appeared on mosaics and whose names were scrawled on walls by adoring fans. Women of the aristocracy were obsessed with them. Ancient graffiti from Pompeii calls one gladiator the sigh of the girls, and another the glory of the ladies. There are documented cases of noble women sneaking into gladiator barracks, paying off guards for private encounters. The gladiator Sergius apparently had affairs with multiple married patrician women, causing enormous scandals. Even stranger, their bodily fluids were commodified. Gladiator sweat was collected after fights, mixed with olive oil, and sold as an aphrodisiac and beauty treatment. Think about that level of celebrity worship. These are enslaved men whose perspiration is being bottled and marketed to the upper classes. But Rome lived in constant terror of these men. The Spartacus rebellion, which happened in 73 BC, was burned into Roman cultural memory. 78 gladiators had escaped, raised an army of 70,000, and nearly brought Rome to its knees. For 2 years, they humiliated legion after legion. When Rome finally crushed them, they crucified 6,000 survivors along the Appian Way, one body every 40 meters for 200 kilometers. A forest of crosses stretching from Rome to Capua. That trauma never left the Roman psyche. Every time a gladiator picked up a sword, everyone remembered that these men had once come terrifyingly close to burning Rome to the ground. So how do you control incredibly dangerous, incredibly valuable men who have legitimate grievances and the combat skills to act on them? You use a combination of brutal punishment and calculated rewards. Extra food rations, prize money, freedom after enough victories. But the sources hint at something else, something more primal. Access to conquered women. The documentation here is frustratingly scattered. Roman writers mention it in passing, like it's too obvious to explain in detail. But when you piece together references from Martial, Juvenal, and later sources, a pattern emerges. After particularly impressive victories, gladiators who survived and fought well were given what ancient sources vaguely refer to as privileges of the victor. Modern historians, reading between the lines and cross-referencing with what we know about military rewards and slave management, believe this often meant access to female captives held beneath the arena. Let's talk about the physical spaces where this happened, because the archaeology is damning. When archaeologists first excavated beneath the Colosseum in the 19th century, they were primarily interested in the impressive engineering, the elevator systems that lifted animals to arena level, the complex tunnels for moving personnel and equipment. But as excavations continued, they found something they didn't expect: specialized chambers that served no obvious logistical purpose. These rooms are small, typically 10 to 15 square meters. They're located in a separate section of the hypogeum, away from animal cages and gladiator-ready rooms. Their distinctive features are what make modern archaeologists uncomfortable. Stone benches line the walls, but unlike benches in other chambers, these are built at a specific height. Iron rings are anchored into the walls at multiple heights, some at floor level, some at waist height, some higher. The doors are heavy, wood reinforced with iron, and they lock from the outside. The walls in several chambers show evidence of scratching desperate fingernails trying to dig through solid stone. The Roman historian Cassius Dio, writing in the 3rd century AD, mentions that beneath major amphitheaters were chambers for those awaiting their use. The phrasing is deliberately vague, but in context, he's discussing the logistics of the games, specifically the management of human resources. But the most disturbing evidence comes from graffiti. In the hypogeum beneath the amphitheater in Capua, the same city where Spartacus launched his rebellion, archaeologists found scratch marks on cell walls. Some are in Latin, others in languages from across the empire. Most are fragmentary, but a few are legible. One, written in crude Latin by someone clearly not a native speaker, translates roughly to, "I was Aemilia of the Brigantes. I saw my children killed. Now I am nothing." Another, in what appears to be Celtic, has been translated as, "To any god who listens, let me die before tomorrow." These aren't the voices history typically preserves. Roman chronicles name emperors and generals, track military victories and architectural achievements. They don't record the names of conquered women catalogued as property. But the stones remember. Now we have to confront the hardest part of this story: what this actually meant for the women trapped in this system. History is almost completely silent on their individual experiences. We don't have diaries. We don't have testimony. What we have are ledgers that list them as numbers and property inventories that describe them like livestock. Female, Germanic, approximately 20 years, good health, assigned to Colosseum holding. But we can reconstruct the nightmare from what we know about the conquest process. These women weren't random prisoners. They came from specific contexts of absolute trauma. When Rome conquered a region that resisted, say, during the Dacian Wars or the suppression of the Britannic revolt led by Boudicca, the aftermath was methodical. Roman military procedure dictated that after the final battle, the civilian population would be processed. Men of fighting age were killed or enslaved for hard labor. Children under a certain age were separated and sold to slave markets in the East, where they'd never see their homeland or families again. Women of childbearing age were designated as captivae and transported in chains to holding facilities. For a woman in this situation, the journey to the arena was already a descent through multiple circles of hell. You'd watched your village burn, you'd seen your children torn from your arms, screaming. You'd been chained to dozens of other women and marched hundreds of miles to Rome. You'd been stripped, examined like livestock, assigned a number, and locked in a cell beneath the greatest monument to the civilization that destroyed everything you knew. The waiting was its own form of torture. You could hear everything, the roar of the crowd above as people you might have known were executed in creative ways for entertainment, the screams of animals being slaughtered, the cheers when a gladiator delivered a particularly skillful killing blow. Roman law provided no protection. You couldn't appeal to magistrates because legally you weren't a person. This was psychological warfare on a civilizational scale. The humiliation of conquered women wasn't a side effect of Roman military policy, it was a deliberate strategy. The goal was to break the spirit of resistance so thoroughly that future generations wouldn't even dare to think about defying Rome. Drop a comment right now telling me why you think hidden histories like this one matter. Because if we don't learn from the past, we're destined to repeat it. Ancient sources make this explicit. After crushing the Jewish revolt in 70 AD, the historian Josephus records that Romans deliberately took Jewish women to be distributed among the legions and the games specifically to demonstrate to survivors that not only had they lost their sovereignty, but they'd lost any ability to protect their families. The message was clear: resist Rome, and this is what happens to your daughters. Here's what should truly disturb you. This system didn't end with some moral awakening. The games continued for centuries, even after Rome officially converted to Christianity in the 4th century AD. The gladiatorial games persisted for decades. The last recorded gladiatorial combat happened in 404 AD, when a monk named Telemachus jumped into the arena to stop a fight and was torn apart by an outraged crowd. Only then did Emperor Honorius permanently ban gladiatorial combat. But even that didn't end the system of captivity beneath the arenas. The infrastructure remained. The practice of taking war captives remained standard military procedure throughout the Byzantine period. The system eventually faded not because of moral progress, but because the Roman Empire itself collapsed. The machinery of conquest stopped, so the supply of captives dried up. The institution died from lack of resources, not from ethical evolution. Today, when tourists visit the Colosseum, they take selfies in front of magnificent arches and marvel at ancient engineering. Tour guides talk about gladiatorial combat and animal hunts. Most never mention what happened in the chambers below. The stones are still there. Those rings bolted into the walls haven't rusted away. The scratch marks from desperate fingernails are still preserved beneath centuries of dust. The ledgers that recorded human beings as inventory items are stored in Vatican archives and museums across Europe, available to anyone who wants to read them. The Colosseum stands as a monument to what empire actually means, not just the grand architecture and military victories we celebrate, but the industrialized horror required to maintain absolute power. The spectacle on the sand was only the half of it that Rome wanted you to see. The other half happened in those chambers beneath your feet, in the moments after the crowd's roar faded into silence. If this exposed something you've never heard before, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're going to keep uncovering the history they tried to erase.